How are you guys doing? Everybody hanging in there? I know we have spent now several hours talking about things that are fairly heavy. And I probably, since we have people online joining this session, should introduce myself. I am John Kroll. I'm the director of the Pulliam School of Journalism and the publisher of the StateHouseFile.com, a news website powered by Franklin College journalism students. And we're going to be talking in this session about ways that journalists can take care of themselves better while doing this difficult and often traumatic work. I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves, because I think after doing this for a while, we all need some activity and some motion. So I'll start with Jamie.
Good afternoon. I'm Jamie Bromley. I am professor of psychology and chair of the psychology department here at Franklin College. I'm starting my 15th year here, which is really hard to believe, but I am a licensed counseling psychologist, and so in my previous life before coming here, I did work as a clinician. I've worked in community mental health, domestic violence, and college or university counseling centers, and I teach counseling clinical related classes to our students.
Hi, I'm Sarah Kinder. I am the director of our counseling center here on campus. I'm a licensed clinical social worker.
I'm Kent Huber. I work for Major Health Partners in Shelbyville, Indiana, about 30 minutes from here if you're not from this area. I am the manager of behavioral health services there, and I've been there about 3.5 years. Prior to that, for the last 25 years, I've been in counseling and mostly community mental health based, lots of addiction work, and enjoying being here today.
Steve.
Yes. Hi, I'm Stephen Black. I'm a 1999 graduate of Franklin College, and I am the director of behavioral health care for Major Health Partners, where Kent works as well, and not a mental health clinician by background. Actually, my background is physical therapy and then hospital leadership, and so I was an executive in multiple healthcare systems and do a lot of executive coaching where we focus a lot on how to care for yourself. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Well, I want to start the conversation just by asking, are there basic steps that, by and large, we have young journalists in the room, and I should say, when you have a question, we're not going to wait until the end of the session to deal with questions. If it pops up, just throw a hand up, or even just, all of you know who I am, just say, hey, John, and I'll come over with the mic. We need to use the mic because that's the only way the people who are participating virtually can hear the question. So when you have a question, but let's start with just basic steps that journalists of any age can take to take care of themselves while doing this work. I'll tell you what, I started with Jamie last time. I'm not going to pick on you this time. I'll pick on Steve.
Sure. So I think journalism, like any profession, I think there's a lot of similarities across professions. One thing I always promote is just having your peer network. Know who your trusted people are in your life. And it's not going to be 100 people, like a couple people. And so who are those individuals? Who can you go to that knows you, who you trust, and who you have that depth of relationship with? And if you don't have that person right now, there's no time like the present to start building those kind of friendships. But then also too, like knowing who you are as an individual, really kind of plumbing the depths of who you are to figure out, what do I value? What's important to me? What's that tuning fork deep inside? Because you'll encounter things that will really rock your world and make you kind of think, boy, what do I believe? I just witnessed this thing, or I had this interview and I've never encountered that thought. So it's important to start grounding now before you get into the world and you start encountering some of those things. That was part of my story with COVID, is like encountering things that I just made me really rethink what I believe about leadership and about humans and how we work together and the challenges we face. And so, again, no time like the present to start working on those things.
Kent.
I think a lot of it is self-awareness and understanding of what trauma is. We talk a lot about it sometimes, but we don't always pinpoint it down into a personal level. So being aware that anytime I feel out of control or I've lost a sense of self, or a serious loss in my life, is looking at that trauma and being aware of when I'm changing internally, that I'm looking at the world differently, I'm perceiving things differently, I may even be reacting to other people differently, I think is a key to being self-aware of where we're at. Kind of taking your own temperature, mentally and emotionally, is so huge. Think about where you were at now, and if you check back and say, where was I at 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and how does that compare? And being aware of that, being self-awareness and practicing some mindfulness is huge in this process.
Sarah?
I think Jamie and I last time started this conversation and kind of went off of each other, so I'll probably cover a lot of what she'll share. But really, when we're talking about caring for yourself, it doesn't always look pretty. It's just the basic needs that you need to meet. And so, when we've experienced stress, when we've experienced a trauma, is really just checking in with yourself. Are you sleeping? Are you eating? Are you drinking water? Are you moving your body in a way that feels good to you? Because those are the most basic things that we need to care for ourselves, and those are typically the first things that go out the window. So a lot of times in those moments, it's not something earth-shattering that needs to happen. It's we need to just look at the most basic ways to take care of ourselves and start there.
Jamie?
Yeah, so to build on what Sarah said, it really is important to think about your coping skills, and that's something you can be working on now. How do you cope with just everyday stress? Because we all have that. And are they healthy coping skills, and not developing habits of unhealthy coping skills and dealing with stress, like using substances as a way to cope. But sleep is essential, and I talked about this previously, like it is one of those foundational things that we're a culture that prides ourselves on not sleeping. And I think journalists are really put in a position where sleep is not valued. And so I think realizing like how essential sleep is to everything else functioning well, your brain cannot function the way it needs to function without sleep. And so you can't regulate your emotions, you can't interact effectively with people, you can't remember information without sleep. It is really actually one of the most important kind of health crises in the country. Other countries get it, and they value sleep in a way that America doesn't.
Yeah, I'll just acknowledge that point. At least when I was in the newsroom there, in my earlier days, the joke was when, anyone would ask whether someone was tired is plenty of time to sleep when I'm dead.
Yeah.
It's not, it is part, sadly, of the journalistic culture. I'm going to shake things up a little bit here from the last session because we have got, by my count, 3 student journalists in here who have covered traumatic stories. Yeah, Cole, you're looking around trying to figure out, you identified 2, you're looking for the third. The third is Sydney, who was in at the end on the sentencing for the Franklin College president who was arrested on sex crimes charges. And I think probably to make this more fun for everybody, I'm going to ask, Cole had to cover the events that led to the firing of Northwestern's football coach, which at a Big Ten school, there's, sort of, whatever faith you believe in, and then there's football up here. So it is a big deal. It was a big deal. Alex, obviously, as we learned, covered the mass shooting at Michigan State University. Sydney was part of a team that covered, was considered a pretty profound betrayal of community trust here at Franklin College. I'm going to ask you guys to talk in turn about how doing those things and reporting on those stories affected you, and then take the conversation, I hope, into areas where we're talking about what might have helped you through it. And Cole, I'll start with you.
Welcome to the panel, Cole.
Yeah, the pressure's on. I didn't expect it is. But I think this story took a toll on all of us because it kind of just bubbled up all of a sudden. And so it wasn't this slow process or this slow burn where we could kind of process it on our own time, but it was just basically go all the time and talking about sleep. I didn't get very much when that story was happening, but but I think the hardest thing was that when you're on top of something and you know something that maybe the world doesn't know, there's not a lot of people you can tell about that, right? And I remember being on the phone one day with my mom, and this was this most stressful day we had, and I had drank like 6 cups of coffee, and I was really jittery, and it was terrible. But we were in the thick of things, and people were kind of threatening us, our safety, and I was like, I want to tell my mom all about this type of stuff, but you just can't, because this stuff is confidential, this stuff is in the works. You're not supposed to be sharing things outside of the people who are supposed to be in the know. And really, I think the biggest thing that I found to help me through that stress was just to get outside or go for a walk, just to take whatever break that I could. I know randomly I made potato leek soup in the middle of it just to do something else and to get away from it. And unfortunately, I got a call from a source right in the middle of making that soup. So I guess it didn't quite work out too well. But kind of finding ways to distract myself, I found was essential, because I don't think I could have made it through the couple of days of real intensity if I hadn't found that.
Yeah, oddly for me, I think that like the shooting and all of that was like easier for me to deal with than other traumatic things that we've covered, because it was like the hardest thing for me, and you were kind of getting at this, Cole, is that like there's kind of like a loneliness about it, right? Of like it's hard to explain what exactly it is to like be like a journalist covering that. Like it's a really weird thing. But the shooting, there was so much understanding of like that you guys are doing a hard thing, that like that was actually, I think, a little bit easier for me. Whereas like, I don't know, in the last couple of years at the State News, like, you know, I wasn't there for the thick of like the Larry Nassar scandal at MSU, but just covering, I mean, not just Nassar, but I mean, there's just such a problem on our campus with like RVSM, with Title IX, and covering that. You become desensitized to it to an extent, because you're talking to so many survivors and you're reading all of these OIE case files, and it's like you don't, you kind of become numb to it, but also it is hard to deal with. And it's like, so I don't know, I've made a point to like talk to my colleagues, try and build relationships with other journalists that cover similar issues, because it can be hard to explain why it's, even now I'm struggling to explain why it's like so stressful, so takes such a toll on you, because you're in such a unique position of not experiencing these traumatic things, but being sort of a party to them by trying to absorb them and explain them to others, that I feel like you kind of take it on yourself to a small extent, and that's just like a unique position that's hard for me, because it feels lonesome, because it's like such a unique thing. But yeah.
I think we're sensing a theme here. Sydney.
Yeah, so the thing that I think really helped me was the fact that like I wasn't the only one reporting on the story. I was actually on the tail end of things, because when I came in as a freshman, we already knew a lot about what had happened, why he was arrested, other details about the case. But being able to like talk with other journalists and have, it was a different relationship, because I was the only freshman that was helping report on the case. So I was able to talk to like upperclassmen who had done other reporting on that, and just like other reporting in general for college. So being able to like talk with them through things that I couldn't talk about with my other friends was really helpful. And then I also just think the fact that we were removed from campus, like that we were going up to Wisconsin to deal with it. We had like talks in the car, or talks in the hotel room that we were sharing together about details of the case and like how we were dealing with that. That was all really helpful. So.
One of the things, I'm sure you guys heard it because you're better trained than I am at this, though, was that sense of isolation that is part of the profession. I mean, even Sydney said with other friends she couldn't talk about it, only those. And, you know, before we came back into this session, we were sort of talking about that too, that there is a lot about this profession people don't get. What are some coping skills for dealing with that? Who wants to lean in on that one? Sarah's looking down, trying to avoid making eye contact now.
Thank you all for sharing that. I think one thing, is it Alex? Yeah. Alex, one thing that I love that you said is that people probably make assumptions that that's probably one of the most difficult things that you've covered. And to you, in some ways, it sounds like maybe it hasn't been, that there are other things that are. And so I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind about trauma too, is that it's unique. So we can't make assumptions to something that I might witness or something that I might experience could be really traumatic for me, whereas for someone else it might not be at all. And so I think that's just important too, especially in the work that you do, is to continue to check in on yourselves and check in on other people, and to not put pressures on yourself of like, well, other people have done things like this, and so this is, even though this is bothering me, that I can't, I can't do something about this, or I can't talk to someone about this, or I can't try and take a break from this, or anything like that. I think as far as coping strategies, just to get back to that question, I love too that Cole, that you said, like just moving your body, because I think that's an important thing, but also something that I heard too was just your level of control, and kind of speaking back to Kent's point is like, just trying to regain some sense of control, and whatever that means, because a lot of times when we're dealing with trauma, things have lost a sense of control. So even if it is right now in this moment, I can leave my room and feel safe and get fresh air and take a walk, and I'm going to do that for myself. I can make soup, or I can make these decisions about things that I can have a sense of control of, whether it's really, in the grand scheme of things, insignificant or not, because I think when we've experienced trauma, we've had a loss of control, and so it's really important to take that back wherever you can.
Anyone else want to?
I think you're certainly a unique generation in the fact of social media, in the fact of how you can connect with people and not really connect. And so I think it's important that you have the opportunity to connect with people around the globe that can be support, but also don't let that be a substitute for the in-person kind, to where you can reach across the table or sit in a car and talk through those things. Don't let that take the place of it, even though it can have benefits, just because you have a broader range of people who have a wide range of experience. Make sure there's that in-person contact.
Can I add to that?
Go ahead,
I would
Jamie.
just say,
Yeah,
'cause
please.
I also heard the challenge of having confidential information and not being able to share, and we can relate to that. Working with clients, we hear things and absorb a lot that we can't share with other people. So you have to think about those ways that just being with people may be helpful too. And so you may not be able to share your story with that person, but just knowing that the presence of that person can be, beneficial and supportive, and just say, I just need to be around somebody, and that, because it may feel like you need to isolate because you can't talk about this thing, but that isolation may cause more stress for you.
And I'm going to take it in another, because after the last session came up, there's a group of students around here who were, and I kind of wish they'd asked all of these questions during the session, but they were really talking about issues of life and work balance, which is a real concern. I mean, for those of us who've done this work, is a big concern. I mean, it is a job that will take everything you have and still ask for more. And, the cliche I say to my students is, it's going to be work that you will love, but it will never love you back. It's, it will dispose of you as soon as it's done with you. So, what ways should they start? And I'm going to pick up on Sarah's point from the last session. What boundaries do you set, not just with other people, but with the work that you are doing? And what are some of the signs? And Sarah, both because you raised the point and because you made the mistake of making eye contact again, I'm going to start with you.
So I think just boundaries are, in general, we, got on this conversation. So I think even if that looks like who are people that I can and can't speak to, kind of the basic level what you were talking about, that loneliness of, this is confidential information. I think making decisions with that of, trying to add some people to your life who maybe you can talk to, whether that's, right now, if you're at an institution of higher education, you likely have a counseling center that you have access to for free. Something else that was mentioned in the last session, too, is just that counseling does come with privilege. It is expensive, and so something for people to know about when you go out into the work world is to be aware of when you're in the interviewing process. There's things called EAP, employee assistance programs, and what those offer, if an employer has that, it's typically larger, mid to larger employers, but they offer free short-term counseling for free, confidential, professional short-term counseling. So we have access to an EAP here at Franklin College for our employees. What it looks like here is 3 sessions per year, which is not great, but it's a start, and especially when you're in the moment and you need to talk to someone. EAPs are typically open to the employee and their immediate household members. And so if you have a younger sibling or a child or a partner who you live with or anything like that, a family member that you live with, you are also able to use their EAP benefits as well. So if Starbucks, for example, they allow 20 counseling sessions per year. So, and that's contracted through a third party. So it's not with someone in your agency where you work. But I think that's something that I just wanted to put out there and make sure that people knew, but especially when you're thinking about the boundary of who you can talk to. So back to your question, because I know I had to throw that in there in some way. But back to your question about boundaries, where do we define them? Who has other ideas?
Well, I think when it comes to work-life balance and all that fits in, I think it's important to remember why you got into this field. What is your purpose? What drives you? And what's that motivation? And so I think as you define that, make sure you're still getting that out of your position. I think that's huge. Also, I think it's important, especially at your age, to start to develop diversions. And what I mean by that is hobbies, interest outside of your line of work. Otherwise, your work will consume you. I think somebody said in the first session, the very nature of being in journalism is looking at journalism all the time. And so sometimes that's good to have something completely different than what you do. I personally, I was raised on a dairy and grain farm, and when I've had enough of clients, I get on a tractor. And that's my therapy, because there's some days I am not ready to talk to one more person. And there's something about the corn and beans don't talk back yet. And so, so as long as I continue that, finding those hobbies and interests that pull me away from the stress and the obligation and all that, and also clarifying my purpose.
Steve, yeah, lean in, and then I'll come to you, I promise you. We'll get it, yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I tell a lot of young executives is that, 2 things. One is that the further I get in my career, the more I realize there's really no such thing as a balance between the two. Like, the truth is that they both affect each other. Like, it's impossible for your home life to remain in a home life bubble and your professional life to remain in a professional life bubble. We're just not hardwired that way. Some are better than others, but eventually they impact each other. And so I think going into profession knowing that is important. 2 is that you have to, as you go throughout school and career, realize that I have to imagine, many different facets of journalism. Some jobs will be better for you than other jobs, depending on where you're at in your personal life. So for me, I was an executive CEO of a hospital, a large hospital, but I had kids that were 10, 7, and 4 years old. And I just got to a point where I realized I can't do this. Like, I can't be there for my kids and my wife the way I need to be. I need to remove that. I need to move away from that. And so I did. I just stopped and got down to a role that's much less burdensome on my family life, where I can be those primary roles, those things that are most important to me. It was worth taking that step back so that I could do those things. Now, there may come a time in the future where I can get back into that place because, if you will, the balance is easier, it's better. And so you just have to know there's a lot of different avenues to go in your career. Figure out what matters most to you and what job works best with what matters most to you. You're not too young to start thinking about that. That's an important thing to start considering now, I would say.
Jamie.
Yeah, no, I think what I want to say fits perfectly with that because the work-life balance is not realistic. It's not a balance. It's a juggle. It's really, you're juggling balls, and some of those are your family life, some of those are your personal interests, some of those are your work. Sometimes you have to know which balls can drop and not be important, and that changes as your career changes and your priorities change. So it's kind of a constant give and take, and that a perfect balance just isn't a realistic. So I don't like that description because it's really difficult to balance. But you have to make choices that fit for your priorities, your values, your goals, and what is really important to you, and really thinking about, being clear on that. And it's a challenge, but it comes with experience too. But it's okay to start thinking about that now. Like how will this position fit with what's really important in my life? And it's gonna shift. There was times when I was in graduate school, I worked 12 hours, 14 hours a day. It's fine. I didn't have kids. My partner was working 12, 14 hours a day in journalism. It's fine. We're like, we'll see you when we see you. It was good. But, it really changed once we had a kid, and that was our priority, so.
I'm going to take it back to you guys again, because with the difficult stories that you did cover, you talked about the things that helped you, but the second part of the question I asked, and I realized as I was thinking it through, we didn't really address, were there things that would have helped you more, systems that could have been in place, or things that would have made the worst parts of that a little easier for you, or a little more palatable? Started with Cole last time. I'm not going to pick on him. I'll take it back to Sydney on that. And then Alex, you're going to be up next, and Cole gets the last word this time.
I don't know. I don't really think so, because I think, at least like within our department, you and Joel and Anne all really understood what we were going through, and then like because we were all reporting on it together at some point, we all really understood like what we were each dealing with, or could at least like understand part of it to talk through it with each other. I don't think there was anything that the college could have done to help me with that. I think maybe in my personal life, my friends or my family understanding that I couldn't talk about it with them, but just being like that presence, because I think it bugged my mom that she couldn't talk with me about some of it, but just like being on the phone with her helped. So I wish she would have understood that. So.
Alex, you ready?
One thing that I think was sort of like a newsroom cultural thing that we've addressed in the months since, but during the shooting and just other times, we've had a weird couple of years at MSU with just like a lot of big news. There was this reflex amongst the leadership. So like after the shooting in that week, I kind of, none of us had classes when they did resume. We weren't really going to classes for a couple of weeks. We were just kind of working. And for me, that was like, and I don't know if this is 100% healthy, but that felt good to just kind of bury myself in the work for a little bit and like focus on that, because that I at least felt like I had some manner of like agency and control. But then there was this reflex amongst the leadership to be like, people are working too much, they're going to burn out. And so like in like a well-intentioned effort to like preserve mental health, they would, say, like I would be like taking off stories, and they'd be like, actually don't, like take a couple days off. And at that point, I just didn't want to take time off, because taking time off meant like processing in a way that it was uncomfortable. And again, I don't know from like you guys are the experts, like if that's 100% healthy, but at least for me, it was a frustrating reflex to have it like, I don't know, the work was a good thing at that point, at least it felt that way. And so we've kind of now embraced more of a culture where it's like, just let people don't want to work because they feel a certain way, like that's 100% okay. But also if people feel like they need to work to like process it in the way that they want to, that's cool too. And that's something we've adopted more recently. But I'm curious if you guys think that's a smart thing or not, because we're still malleable.
All right. I think since what what we had reported was like had to be so close to our chests. We had to keep our cards so close to each other. I think I would have, in just my situation, I wish I had spent more time ahead of time getting to know my colleagues a little better, because those are the people that you were going to war with. You know, you were they were the people that were going along, experiencing the same things as you, knowing the same things as you, and kind of having the same struggles as you as at the moment. And I think that there was a chance to lean on each other, to rely on each other as a team, that if we had known each other better moving into that, we had only been working together for a couple weeks at that point. The four of us who were in that story, that I think that when we were thrown into this situation, when we were thrown into this stress, that we paid for it, and we paid for kind of having to build that rapport, those relationships on the fly. And so when I think about going into a career and going into a newsroom professionally, one of the things that I think is a goal for myself wherever I go is to build those relationships with colleagues right off the bat, because you can't wait for a time of crisis to lean on them, to have to try to get to know them, and so I think that's the and it wasn't a system that could have helped me or something that from the top down that would have changed how that situation played out for me, but it was really on me to try to make those relationships and build friendships within the newsroom, so that I had my own support system when I really needed it.
I suspect that there's stuff from both Sydney and Cole you're going to want to respond to too, but just to be fair, let's answer Alex's question first. Who wants to, whether, that shoving aside was healthy or not, that he didn't want to deal with it at the time. Pardon? Well, okay, and I guess, and I'm projecting a little bit. I've worked in newsrooms for a lot of years, and that is kind of an impulse. Is you've got a deadline ahead of you, and you say we're going to deal with it afterwards, after I file the story. Is that a more fair characterization? Okay, all right.
I think delays can be beneficial for a time. I think it's important to possibly set a date in the future to say, hey, if I haven't processed it by this time, or I haven't taken some moments to do that, because we know that trauma is easier treated in many cases early on, right after the event. At the same time, we also know the brain is continually trying to find coping ways to do it. Trauma is really just a shock reaction when it's a one-time incident. And so the body, when the body goes into shock, it shuts down everything, it keeps the essential organs going. And so that's part of what the mental and emotional side of our bodies do. So I would say it's okay to stay busy for a time, but don't forget and don't delay too far. Go back, especially when you start to see the coping skill then becomes unhealthy, to where I don't have anything else but I'm working myself to death to avoid the processing.
Anyone else want to weigh in, or?
I think something that comes to mind for me is this sounds similarly in a way to, I'm not a journalist, so it's a way that I can sort of relate to that. I was just having a conversation with a colleague recently about bereavement time. So, after losing someone and kind of that death, and some people want to go right back to work immediately, and I just can't. I just need to keep myself busy in that moment, and some people need that time right then and there for whatever has come up for them. And there's no right or wrong way, but I can agree with what was just said there. And I think what caught my attention when you were speaking was when you were like, that was too uncomfortable for me, and I didn't know how to process that in that way. I think that's kind of a sign that it probably needs to be addressed at some point. And so if in that moment it's easiest to keep going, I think setting a timeline for yourself of okay, but at some point I do have to stop, and I have to acknowledge this, and I have to sit with that discomfort and kind of figure out what to do with it.
And it's odd, Sydney and Cole, it struck me, we're talking about, they both in ways we're talking about issues of trust and negotiating relationships of some intimacy. Cole wanted to build them in the newsroom with his colleagues, and the phrase he used that I'm sure stuck in your head, these are the people you're going to war with. Probably ought to talk about that a little bit at some point, Cole. And Sydney was talking about, how normally with people you love, you don't withhold. But in this case, and often in the profession, you do have to withhold. There are things you can't talk about. Could we talk a little bit about how you negotiate those parts of your life? I've been picking on Sarah and Kent, so I'm going to go to Jamie first on this one.
So the thing that came to my mind, first of all, with what Sydney said is, especially with your mom, is asking for what you need, and figuring out how best to do that. That can be challenging, but just saying, Mom, I really value our relationship. This is something I can't talk about, but just having you on the phone is really helpful. Can we just talk about other stuff? I can't talk about work, but just having you there and just identify. So figuring out what you need, right? That's the process, is identifying and knowing yourself, but then also letting those people around you know. And we talked about this before, is a lot of people are ready to give us advice, right? Or try to solve our problem, but that may not be what you need at that time. So knowing what you need helps you know how to ask for what you need.
Anybody else want to lean in on that one?
What?
Go ahead.
I think the confidentiality piece the three of us can certainly understand, and Steve will as well, being in healthcare, is that there's always those limits. I've prepped my family. They know that they're not going to hear much about my day. And so it's kind of education the family on what your limits are. I've never had a bring your child to work day. That's just not going to happen. And so there is this secretive part of my life. But even in public surroundings, my family knows some of the rules. Like if somebody comes up and says hi, and they say, "Who's that?" I'll just say, "Well, someone I know." Just from the standpoint of the confidentiality layer that happens. And so I think it's educating those closest to you. And I think, Cole, you said developing those relationships prior. Figuring out what person you really feel close to, or those two people you feel close to, that kind of connect early on, because then when you may not even feel like connecting, you at least know that person's there, so that when I do call Mom, she at least just listens, and she's not saying, "But I want to know," I want to know my daughter's okay, and doing that and just educating them.
Steve.
Yeah, Cole, I want to applaud you on what I would call wisdom. I mean, you've learned from something that I think is great. Don't let your head get too big. And this is one piece of wisdom. But I've done a lot of mass casualty event training in my life. So you work with healthcare systems, other systems in the community. A tornado rolls through. What do you do? Like, what happens next when Whiteland gets shut down, And so one of the things we always talk about is the time to develop a relationship with an entity that you need partnership with is not when the tornado's on top of you. It was months ahead of time. It was years ahead of time. And I think what you said is right on par. I mean, you've learned from this. You all will be in newsrooms in the future. You all will be in jobs and other places with camaraderie and peers. Start right from the beginning. Like, what does healthy relationship look like to you? What would you want it to be? And then create that atmosphere. Start there, because when it does hit the fan, you want to have that relationship already. You don't want to have to start there, because that will be very difficult. So I love it that you said that, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in that.
And Alex, I want to apologize if I did mischaracterize what. No, it's important, and I applaud you for correcting me on it. But I think, some of this is important, because this work does put you in often very awkward positions. Because while I hear what Cole is saying, you want to be with those, have those tight relationships of trust with the people you're going to be in the foxhole with. I'll continue your military imagery there, Cole. It's not good for anyone to live exclusively in the foxhole. You still have to have relationships with people who don't do this kind of work. And, how do we go about negotiating that? And I'm focusing really on these folks who are just launching their careers right now. Jamie, I gave you a break at the beginning of the program. I'm going to start with you now.
Well, and I think to build on what Steve was saying, I think now is the time to build those healthy coping skills, because you need those when the tornado, just like the relationships, you need to know how to take care of yourself now. So that's why we're doing this. And one thing I mentioned in the previous session is, journalists in particular have a much higher risk of developing a substance use disorder than the general population because of the stress of the job, because of the exposure to trauma. So learning how to, make healthy choices, have healthy coping skills now is really essential. For all college students, really, but especially for journalism students, because there can also be a culture within the field of using substances. I'm hoping it's changed, but I know, historically, you're just at greater risk, and knowing that already might help you think, maybe going out for drinks to cope with what happened is not the best choice right now. Like, what else could we do? So, we've given some other kind of tips around that, but, both the physical self-care and the emotional self-care, learning kind of how to cope now will help you so much more in the future.
Well, let's pick that up. What are healthy coping strategies?
So we talked about it a little bit with the physical self-care, right? The sleeping, the eating, moving your body in some way, finding some type of way that helps you to unwind, to relax your mind, or even be able to turn off your mind, something like relaxation, meditation, getting that social support. All those are really essential, I think.
Go ahead,
If I could too, again, just like 2 years of working through COVID, I'd be remiss if I didn't also just bring up a faith element. For me, my faith background was critical, and being able to have those rhythms, spiritual disciplines in my life where I would sit with the Bible open or talk with my wife about passages, just reminding me of what grounds me. That was critical. Those are really important. And so if that's a part of your life, I would say that's also I don't know if we'd call that a coping strategy, but I think that's a really important thing as well.
I couldn't tell, Sarah, if you had something you wanted to say. Kent, or you?
Well, I think it's, you mentioned outside of the area, finding interest outside of the area. As journalists, you have a great opportunity to investigate something that may not be an assignment and just explore it. Find something that's outside. I'm here today because Steve's my boss, but I'm thrilled to be here because I haven't worked a whole lot in this area. I've dealt with trauma most of my career, but this is a unique field. It was unique at one time to work with military. I've done quite a bit of that now. And so stretching that a little bit helps me say, wow, that's a whole different perspective than the way I would have seen it before. One of the major coping skills that's out there now, and you can Google this, it's mindfulness. It's part of that meditation and those type of things. But it's about living in the moment and about pulling myself away from the stress of yesterday or today or tomorrow and focusing on what's happening in right now. And it's amazing how little we do that in our American society. For instance, one mindfulness exercise is to chew your food 30 times and just taste the food. Just take a moment to kind of say, what does this food taste like? Because most of us scarf it down and do it so quickly. And so taking a moment just to say, what's happening around me right now, and being able to focus on that, that helps us pull away from the stress of yesterday.
Joe, they can't hear us online unless we do that.
So, to Jamie, you talked about the importance of sleep. As I've gotten older, sleep is trouble for a lot of people and a lot of occupations, right? Mm-hmm. Can you give some suggestions? I did a study in my master's program in gerontology, and we did a lot of study around how sleep gets different as you age. What are some sleep hygiene kind of recommendations you can give us all? Thank you.
Sure, yeah, so it's changed for me as well, so I understand. I used to be such a good.
Wish I could tell you it gets better, but
I
it
know,
doesn't.
Well, I see my mother's 79, and I'm just like, oh, no. So, I think there's a few things they recommend. One, this is really bad for your sleep. So not being on your phone, at least for 20 minutes before you go to bed, which is hard, because I like to do things on my phone when I go to sleep. But being away from that kind of artificial light, and just doing something else is helpful. So like reading, but having a good sleep environment. I'm using a white noise machine that really helps, and some research shows that can be really helpful because it can drown out other sounds. Having kind of a dark place to sleep. I think for college students, it's really hard because if they're living in a communal living situation, you don't have a lot of control over your environment. You're like, students tell me that, I'm trying to sleep, but there's people running down the hall. So, but I think, there's, as part of that, moving your body, eating well too, all contributes to sleeping well. But it does change as you age, and we get less continual sleep. There's a lot of, waking up. And so one of the things to say is, try not to stare at a clock, because if you think, oh, I've been up for an hour, the more you look at that clock, the more kind of you're turning yourself on and thinking about the world around you. So you want to try to stay in that kind of sleepy kind of place as much as possible. So not checking your phone when you wake up.
Sure.
The result of the gerontology control group was that neither group, the group that was studied with sleep hygiene methods versus the group that did not, still looked at their phones, did whatever. They didn't sleep longer, but the group that practiced sleep hygiene, they slept much better, much deeper. And so they worked smarter. So I don't know, but that's what the study said.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Well, I think something else that comes into play, Dr. Bromley mentioned your phone and just from the aspect of the light that comes into play, but I think also just thinking about your response to when you hear it, whether you hear it vibrate or you hear a text message, those kinds of things. I sleep with my phone on, there's so many things to use, tools on your phone now, like a do not disturb kind of thing. You can even allow certain numbers, like if this person calls, then it'll ring, that kind of a thing. But otherwise, you're not getting those continual notifications. And I think that's helpful. I use a meditation app called Insight Timer, which is free, that I love. There are sleep meditations on there that are really great. And I think when we're talking about the importance of sleep, another side of, kind of journalism is, a really trauma-informed lens and some of the research that's out there for police investigations. For example, when interviewing someone who has been a victim of violence or a victim of trauma, that really they're supposed to give that person 2 sleep cycles before talking to them about that incident. And that's because of what our brains and our bodies need in those moments. And so really when we look at the sleep and the importance of it, it's there, and it's also there for you too. I think the hard part is sometimes in those moments we talk about how important sleep is, but then sometimes it's hard to actually allow yourself to fall asleep in those moments.
Because this was a theme that came up in the last session, when there are some times when, for professional reasons or whatever, your schedule is not your own. I'm thinking of the very last story I ever did for the Indianapolis Star. I got sent up to Carmel, which for those of you who are not from Indiana is just north of Indianapolis. There'd been a bank shooting up there. The branch manager had been killed, 3 other people. The shooter had tried to flee and gone across the road, climbed up into a tree and killed himself. And I was up there stomping around in the mud all day, covering the story, came back, filed it, finally got home at about 3 o'clock in the morning with plans that I was just going to sleep for the rest of the day. And the phone rings at 5 o'clock in the morning and tells me to come back into the newsroom, which I did because, the family of the bank manager had told the paper that they were willing to talk and do a story, but only if the paper sent me. They weren't going to talk to any other reporter. So, even in that situation, if I'd been trying to practice good sleep hygiene, to use Joe's phrase, it wouldn't necessarily have worked. Are there ways that you still, within structures like that, can take steps to take care of yourself? Jamie, this time you are the one who made the mistake of making eye contact. So,
I mean, that's a really challenging hazard of the job, right? Journalists' schedules are not 8 to 5 at all. So I think knowing that about your occupation and just being prepared that there's just gonna be times like that. So no sleep hygiene is gonna help you with 2 hours of sleep. I mean, so but are there times where you can set boundaries?
Exactly.
Yeah, and just, I mean, how effective are you going to be at your job? How well is your brain going to function? And to be really present with that family if you are completely sleep deprived. So I would just encourage knowing that there's times where you might just have to say boundaries. I really want to be there. I want to help this family, talk to this family, but this could also wait, right? This could wait 8 hours. So, did you say
you
anything?
look like you were leaning in.
Well, some of you in this room may not even know this reference, but don't be the Lone Ranger. In the sense of, try to get on a team where you can shut your phone off on occasion, even if it's not every weekend or whatever else, but try to find a team where that task is shared. Because in my work with counselors, as a counselor, what I find out, there's always going to be certain people that will probably say yes no matter what I ask them to do. And there's also people that are going to be more reluctant and say no. Now, if I am not managing well, I'm going to go to the yes person all the time, but I'm going to lose that yes person. So I want to be aware that, okay, I've got to kind of help this person learn to say no, and help the no person say yes more often as well. So just don't try to be the hero all the time.
Well, and I think that sets us up, and I'll take this as kind of the last round of questions here. What are some of the signs? I mean, obviously we've got 3 people in here who have already covered very traumatic stories, difficult, that made, emotional.
I think also, it's important to recognize that trauma is subjective. And so I think even though we might think that 3 of those were, I think giving space for other people that have done stories that there's some level to difficulty too. So I think even people that we haven't spoken to, I think just honoring the things that you have done, that the news in general is not easy to cover, right? And so I think just in and of that, I think giving yourself all some grace that you all have done some really difficult work at different points, no matter if we're acknowledging that today as a school shooting or not.
Fair point. Thank you. Thank you for that. But the question I wanted to ask is, what are the signs that maybe all the experience, the trauma that you have experienced is beginning to back up and overwhelm you? I mean, in terms of taking care of yourself, that means doing, a personal inventory every now and then, and realizing what things should these young journalists be looking at. Everyone now, it's like a classroom when you ask a difficult question. Everybody suddenly gets fascinated with his or her shoes. So, Jamie.
I'll start. I mean, I think once you start noticing a change in your ability to function on a daily basis, if it is affecting your ability, we're talking about sleep, but trauma can affect your sleep, right? So if you're having difficulty sleeping, if you're having difficulty eating, if you find yourself pulling away from people and isolating, it's some kind of significant change in your, everyday behavior, I think is, what we look for as clinicians, as well as, feelings of some kind of distress or just feeling upset and not really knowing kind of what it is. I felt that in my previous work. There was times where, the work was really difficult and you're just so busy doing it, you may not notice, certain things. But then I realized, I need a vacation. I remember a time when we had a vacation planned, and I really needed a vacation. Our son was like 15 months old, and there was a hurricane coming to our vacation spot. And I just broke down and cried. I was so upset that a hurricane was coming without thinking about but I was like, I need this vacation. And then I was like, whoa, that was a real overreaction to we might have to change our plans. There's other places to go. So that was a sign for me, yes, you really do need a vacation. The hurricane ended up not coming. It was fine. But at the time, I was like, oh, yeah, that's different for me. I really do need a break.
I think reactions, watch your reactions, how have they changed? One of the elements of trauma, or especially PTSD, is overreaction or hypervigilance, to where everything becomes dangerous. For instance, if I'm in an accident out here on one of your roads, and then every intersection, if I'm pausing extra long to make sure there's no cars coming and all those kind of things, because the brain is an alarm system. And true PTSD, the alarm is always going off. Everything's a crisis, everything's a danger. And if you're watching your reaction times that are way out of balance, even toward people or just thoughts in your head, it's important to kind of draw back and say, hey, this isn't who I am, or this isn't who I was, and I don't want to go farther down this road.
Sarah, you were leaning in.
Yeah, we just did an activity which I think could be beneficial for you all. We just did an activity at the beginning of the school year with our division that really just trying to take some time to reflect for yourself. What are things that I notice about myself when I'm in that place? So, because I think it's going to be unique to everybody. And for some people, it might be like irritability, or you kind of realize some big things, like when I'm getting upset and I'm sort of losing grasp of, there are people that are maybe going to have their homes destroyed and their lives destroyed and died, and I'm worried about myself, those kinds of moments too. But just in general, when do you start to notice, is it, I'm on the phone with my mom and I find myself wanting to get off the phone because everything she's saying is annoying to me. Whatever it is that you're noticing, I start to get irritated by this. Making note of those kinds of things and sharing them with others, and thinking about who are the people that can help you in those moments, can help you notice those things, and then what are the things that can help you in those moments. So I think it's got to take some self-reflection, because we're all going to show different signs when we're in those places.
And I want to tag on what Alex said. He asked a good question, can I delay it? The answer is yes. But also, don't put a timeline on healing. Don't think, okay, I've finished my treatment, everything's good. Because Alex, it sounds like you've been very open with the process and what you went through, and yet you had kind of this surprise look this afternoon when you didn't remember if you used notes or not. And that's okay. It's okay to still have those moments where you're like, maybe I haven't processed the whole scene, or maybe there's more to look at. Doesn't necessarily mean that, but it can. So those memory lapses that maybe I'm still trying to catch up on.
I think that's a good last word. Please join me in thanking our superb panel.